Good morning and good morning. Happy Tuesday. This is Keith Moore from KDM and Associates and co-partner and producer of the Innovation in Agriculture and Energy Opportunity Zone Summit. We thank you for being on day 2 of this historic event. Before I begin turning over this panel called Rural Opportunity Zones and HBCUs, the impact investments and capacity building to Dr. Herb Thompson, who's going to introduce our speakers today. I want to just say that my father, who passed away in 2003, used to always say to me, and I took many of his words to heart, more importantly after his eternal rise, that he said, son, if it looks like a duck, it sounds like a duck, it must be a duck. He would say to me, son, you don't need to eat a whole cow to know it's beef. Well, our technical difficulties this morning that unfortunately we all experienced, including you who tried to get in and didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, finds ourselves in the environment that we all are in. It's called a pandemic, COVID-19 disrupted environment that causes us to have to be both resilient and responsive to what's happening and what's in front of us. So I apologize on behalf of our entire team for the technical difficulties that you may have experienced in trying to get in. But you're here now. We've prepared for you. We've put in many hours of commitment, purpose, intentionality to make sure this panel and all others forthcoming are going to enrich you with information that you didn't have before, that you didn't really understood, even if you had it. And I'm so thankful to be able to turn this over to a most competent, accomplished Dr. Herb Thompson to lead us in the introduction of our panelists this morning. Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson. Good morning.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Keith, for that introduction as well. Yes, I'm very delighted this morning to introduce Dr. Venus Welch-White and Angela Washington. Dr. Venus Welch-White, National Rural Energy Program Coordinator, USDA Rural Development. Right. Venus Welch-White served as the National Rural Energy Program Coordinator in USDA's Rural Business Cooperative Services. In her current role, she conducts stakeholder engagement, outreach, business strategy and development, policy support, and facilitate collaborations with internal and external partners in agriculture, energy, biofuel, business development, and financial institution. Right. Angela Washington is a Senior Business Development Specialist of MBDA Office of Business Development. Angela Washington, Senior Business Development Specialist, is an experienced executive with first-hand operational experience and has over 20 years of federal government experience, serving 6 presidential administrations. She holds various programs and specialized positions in key government agencies such as the Office of Personnel Management, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Commerce. Angela joined the Minority Business Development Agency, MBDA, in January of 1999 in the Office of the National Director during the Clinton administration. Currently, she is a Senior Business Development Specialist in the MBDA Office of Business Development, OBD, providing management and technical assistance to businesses domestically and international, among other responsibilities. Without further ado, I now hand over to Angela Washington and Dr. Venus Welch-White. Thank you. Angela.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I appreciate the introduction. I'm certainly honored to be here. It's a pleasure to be on this panel alongside Dr. Venus Welch White. I am excited to talk about MBDA in the Department of Commerce and what we do as an agency. I was asked specifically to hone in on some of the specific strategies, some of the specific initiatives that we have undertaken as an agency to really help view minorities in this space. And one of the monumental steps that we took was to renew our partnership with the Department of Energy Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. And we had a virtual MOU signing. We had some other activities where we collaborated at the American Association for Blacks in Energy, headed by Ms. Paula Glover. And we brought in some very critical subject matter experts who really talked about how to leverage those treasures and equities at the Department of Energy. And I mentioned this on yesterday, and I know Dr. White will talk a little more about how agriculture overlays with energy, as coined by the name of the summit. But one of the things that we looked at was, where are minority firms in this space? Where are minorities accessing resources? And we learned that the Department of Energy had opened up its vast portfolio of national laboratories. There are about 17 federal DOE national laboratories around the country where they have really, really taken a keen look at how they create a pathway for inclusion. And I'm seeing a very deliberate approach at making sure that there's access to the facilities, making sure there's access to the scientists, making sure there's access to the research, the IP, and all those things to help minorities continue to explore the necessary advancements to sustain their businesses. I have enjoyed a number of conversations with Mr. Moore and Dr. Thompson about the participation rate of minorities in agriculture. And when we look at how critical it is for minorities to participate in feeding our communities, providing, being a part of food security, having an active role, having a seat at the table, there's a number of ways there's a number of things that need to happen to ensure that minorities are aware of the opportunities in agriculture, to make sure that minorities are aware of the need for their participation in this industry. It gives us a really vast opportunity to engage. And when you look at timing, the timing of opportunity zones, the timing of the MOU with the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Energy is very relevant to how we think about a unified approach to helping this industry grow. And I'm uber excited about the fact that it's overlaid around our critical HBCUs, and looking at those 19 or so HBCUs that are actively engaged in agriculture, that are actively engaged in innovation, that are actively engaged in creating solutions of the future. I truly believe that it's our responsibility to continue to follow Mr. Moore in bridging that gap between industry, government, and university, academia, to really create solutions that minority firms can grasp a hold of. So when you look at tapping into the superpower of the Department of Energy and knowing that there's a very direct intersect into agriculture, it's critical that a pathway is laid for that success. And I believe that the first pathway is making sure that we get the information, we get the tools in the hands of those minority communities, those minority businesses, those minority institutions, and empower them to tap into powerhouse resources like the Department of Energy to really develop their products, to really develop their services, to really develop their strategy. I mean, there are experts that are there every day that are taking phone calls, they're answering emails, they're on their websites, and they're looking at the challenges that you present, and they're matching that with the technology and the resources and the tools that they have. And there's agencies like agriculture that you're going to hear about that's doing those things and more. So in my comments today, I want to ensure people know who MBDA is, how we can help, and certainly how you can begin to look at, if you are not actively engaged in agriculture, how do you engage, and if you are in agriculture, how do you really increase your capacity, ensure your sustainability, and ensure your participation in being a part of these challenges and opportunities around agriculture. I am not certainly the expert in all three of these areas, agriculture, energy, as well as opportunity zones, but what I do know is government programming. What I do know is how we connect these siloed, if you will, resources and make one unified platform for minority businesses to engage. So I'll go very quickly over MBDA, who we are, and just some context. I went over it yesterday, so I don't want to, not necessarily sure how much of the same audience is here, but just very quickly, MBDA, if you don't know, is one of 12 bureaus within the Department of Commerce, which I believe is one of our most uniquely situated federal agencies. We do everything from the census, which just recently closed, patent and trademarks, International Trade Administration, which you know deals a lot with our agriculture import and export. And when you look at the mission of the Department of Commerce, it's very vast. We at MBDA are very fortunate to be in the center of that, because our role is purely to just ensure that minority firms are competitive, that they're growing, and that they're a part of our economy. And we want to make sure that they're on this continuous journey of transformation along with industry. So as opportunities like the Opportunity Zone come, it's critical that you educate yourself to the core on what it means and what the opportunity is, and how to leverage it for the short and the long term. So I'm, again, grateful for that. But as I look at MBDA's mission, I'm also thankful for how we've been able to support the community. If you look at what we've done in fiscal year 2019, we've been able to connect MBE entrepreneurs to private lenders, banks, mutual funds, and investors of all sorts. And I think we did something around $1.6 billion in capital transactions. We did another $3.1 billion in contracts. And then we did another $300 million in export opportunities. And if you look at what we're poised to close out in 20, I think we doubled the export numbers, much around agriculture. So when you look at MBDA's experience and its role in supporting the community, we have a direct hand in how we support the community, not just by standing up programs and collaborating with federal agencies, but really putting boots on the ground that you can tap into, that you can leverage, that you can sit down with and strategize with. We have about nearly 36 business centers around the country, from Maryland to Texas to California, Georgia, and so forth, to Colorado. But then when you look around agriculture, we have 5 export centers from California, Florida, Illinois, Texas. Those centers have a vast amount of experience around opportunity zones. They work very closely with HBCUs and MSIs, as well as large industry partners and small and mid-sized minority firms. So this network that exists, it's also overlaid by 4 more centers around advanced manufacturing in Georgia, Maryland, Michigan, and Texas. We've made investments in rural community assistance corporations and with organizations like the Rural Community Assistance Corporation. So we have had, and I would be remiss not to mention that we also worked with a minority-owned firm at the onset of opportunity zones to go around the country and to put together ecosystems of opportunity zone partners and partnerships that can be leveraged. So we've infused this information into our business center network. And they are empowered to sit down and help you, whether it's at the organizational level, whether you are providing opportunities in the agriculture space, or you're just simply looking for those opportunities. If you happen to connect with an MBDA center that's not necessarily engaged in an agriculture space or an opportunity zone space, you can always connect to another business center because they work across geographic borders. And to get connected to our MBDA business centers, as I lean over to, as I close out here, I want to give the website www.mbda.gov, www.mbda.gov. You can go there. You can take a look at our business center network. You can reach out to our business centers. You can talk with them about some of the work that we've done in Opportunity Zones, some of the projects that they've assembled, some of the stakeholders that they've garnered, some of the investors, some of the community leaders, and so forth and so on. So leaving much time, I want to leave as much time as possible for our true expert here today, who is Dr. Venus Welch-White, again from the National Rural Energy she's a National Rural Energy Program Coordinator at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I am actually very excited and looking very much forward to her presentation. Again, if I could echo any sentiment, it would be to our minority institutions, our minority firms, and all those who are vested in the participation of minority firms in agriculture, that you really harness these federal programs that I mentioned, such as the Department of Energy. I know when we hear energy, we don't necessarily think agriculture, but Mr. Moore has done a good job of educating the populous world about the importance of these two sectors. I wish I had more time to talk about manufacturing and the great resource there at Department of Commerce through the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, but I know Dr. Carol Martin Thompson is a part of this summit. She also is another knowledgeable wealth of knowledge around connecting to those vast resources at the Department of Commerce. So again, I just really want to say thank you to Dr. Thompson for the warm introduction, all the great work that you're doing. Again, to Mr. Moore for this incredible, informative summit. I am confident that this is the right stakeholders, this is the right ecosystem of stakeholders to really propel this mission forward. I look forward to certainly being a part of it for as long as I can be. I've been around for about 2 decades, and all willing, here's some wood, knock on wood, I'll be around for a few more decades. But again, I thank you for the opportunity to just talk about MBDA and how we're here to support and connecting to those resources. And again, I look forward to the presentation of Dr. White, and I thank you all for having me here today.
Well, thank you very much, Angela. Right.
Angela, thank you so much for what I can call authentic engagement on behalf of minority businesses over the years. On behalf of KDM and Associates, we've had the privilege of working with MBDA over 18 years, and to know from different locations around the country with conferences to one-on-one meetings to office meetings, and what it takes to really assist a minority business. We've been through all channels of that. So the conversation, ladies and gentlemen, that you're hearing today is of grand authenticity. In other words, it works when you work it. And what we're here to do is to educate you as to how it literally works in your business. So to that end, we had a conversation both with the National Director, David Bird, and his commitment. I want to give a shout out for kidpreneurs, Angela, which was a term that we want to move into the eco because it's young people that we'll even hear from this afternoon, that you will be convinced that the innovative creativity and the energy combined with guidance and leadership and mentorship can produce what we want to produce out of this 5-year journey, which is to increase the number of minority individuals, companies, farmers, HBCUs who literally produce and create jobs, create wealth. And so without taking any more time, I just want to thank you as the moderator. There will be some questions hopefully at the end. Also want to not only piggyback on that has been said, but also Venus, if we can, good morning, and looking forward to what you have to respond to. But yesterday, I want to just give a recap of gratitude on how amazing you and Chuck Zellick from the Department of Energy echoed why the MOU, what was the MOU between agriculture and energy, and to give us case studies that allowed us to see what works, what kind of communities, how can farmers use opportunity zones. So this is a shout out to the public policy creators and the thought that goes into the design of helping underserved, untapped communities. We have a big gap, however, and I don't want to be pie in the sky. These conversations must take the next step and convert accessing capital, et cetera, that you will be talking about is what we want to make sure we take. Remember this? Notes all day long. Make those notes turn into dollars, and most of all, make sense so that you know how to run your business, build your curriculum, turn the corner in a COVID environment so that we show how we are resilient and will get beyond where we are today with our challenges and constraints. Thank you so much, Angela. Venus, please take the mic.
Good morning, everyone. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for that lovely bio introduction. Thank you so much for my counterpart, Mrs. Angela Washington. I certainly appreciate your thoughtful comments, as well as to Mr. Keith Moore. So again, thank you so very much for having me. And I guess I would say in a lot of ways, this summit is really a compendium of all the things that I've worked on throughout actually my training and education. I'm a proud graduate of Tuskegee University. I have 3 degrees from Tuskegee, so I understand the HBCU world very well. I'm really looking at some of the challenges as well as opportunities that HBCUs present, specifically those in the South. Tuskegee is located in Alabama, and so you're talking about agriculture in the South and all the things that looks like in the standpoint of food security, but not necessarily in the direct, I would say agricultural space, but really in a systems approach. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen kind of on the front end and the back end in the ag space, and energy notwithstanding. So again, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come and just share, again, my experience, my training, how my career has kind of unfolded into this particular space that I understand and have a really good handle on all the things that this very unique intersection that we're discussing today. And so I want to just kind of start off, and I would say I'm going to piggyback off of my counterpart. I did mention, this is Angela Washington. I did mention yesterday, if anybody was on, kind of the USDA landscape, but I think it probably is worthwhile to really kind of talk about that just briefly, just so people can understand like the vastness of USDA. I only represent one tiny agency But there are so many different elements and components, and likewise funding opportunities that are associated and resources that are associated with different agencies that carry out different functions. I will not necessarily talk about all of them. However, USDA has 17 different agencies and offices that carry out a vast number of missions. Some regulatory. People often think, USDA grade certified. I think when I first started working for USDA, people asked me, did I inspect meat? And I was like, I do not. There are people that do that, but I am not one of them. And so while we do that, and I think that's what most people think, they think, ag, and they think eggs and meat. There are so many other elements of the USDA. And so my agency, my mission area is rural development. And so again, very timely in the standpoint of really looking at, rural opportunity zones and the intersection of HBCUs and looking at the capital needs as well as capacity building. So within rural development, we have 3 different agencies: Rural Business and Cooperative Services, which is the agency that I represent, Rural Housing Services, as well as Rural Utility Services. And each one of these particular agencies has, they do invest capital. I would say across the compendium, we average about $200 billion annually in investments, specifically in rural communities. Just to frame out, when we're talking about rural communities, we're typically talking about populations of 50,000 or less. And so while there are some programs that you don't necessarily have to be within those population limits, as a general rule, I would say that's probably a pretty good thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind when we're discussing rural communities. The irony is that we have a lot of HBCUs that are located in rural areas, and I can name some of them off: Fort Valley State, Tuskegee University. I think North Carolina A&T is actually in a rural area. So there's a lot of opportunities when we're looking at where these HBCUs are located, where they're housed, and kind of what that looks like in the standpoint of rural development, potential rural development funding, as well as other types of funding within the USDA. Also, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, so I apologize for any repeat if you have to hear this again, 40% of opportunity zones are actually located in rural communities. And so when you look at this intersection, this opportunity to kind of bring all these potential resources together and really be able to maximize, to have impact, you are really talking about rural these opportunity zones really located primarily, 40% is pretty significant, in rural communities. You layer that with any kind of demographics, African American, Hispanic, Hmong, Asian American, where farmers are located, there's even further opportunity to really support the advancement of minorities and minority communities in these areas. So here's the opportunity. Here's some of the challenges. You're also talking about typically rural communities that don't have access in the standpoint of, you've got a lot of poverty persistent counties. You have counties that don't necessarily have access to all of the health care. There's food deserts there. So you look at all these wonderful things, and you look at some of the challenges that we face when we're looking at rural communities and looking at the poverty levels and its out migration, i.e. people are moving that used to live there, moving out to go to more urban areas. School systems, quality of health, and there, again, the list can go on and on. I will not bore anybody this morning on all of the challenges that we face, but really looking at, again, kind of focusing on those opportunities because there are some challenges within rural communities. I also want to mention, and so I certainly appreciate Angela mentioning the MOUs that are in existence, specifically with them, with MBDA and Department of Energy, as well as our large MOU that was discussed in detail yesterday, the Department of Energy, as well as the USDA. So we're super happy that we have this MOU. We often have been working across, if anybody is familiar with DC, USDA and Department of Energy literally sit across the street of each other. We're on the same Independence Avenue, and so you cross over. So we often talk about going across the street to work with, meet with, collaborate with our federal partners that are just, again, we share Independence Avenue. So we have been working collectively and collaboratively long before this MOU was kind of formalized and put in place, and I think Chuck mentioned that yesterday. I will also note that there is an existing MBA with USDA and SBA, the Small Business Administration. So when we're specifically looking at impact investing and capacity building and access to capital, that is also another resource. And our MOU specifically works with the rural community aspect. So we're really looking at rural areas and kind of mirroring that with the different SBA programs. And I won't bore you, but I would say most people are pretty familiar with the 504 program, as well as a 7B or 7A. It's 7 something, I apologize. I think it's 7B program that SBA has. So again, here's some other opportunities where we're looking at our federal partners and being able to access, resources. There's a lot of different things that are happening to kind of go along the line. The other, I want to just make one quick note about working with AID. So I was super happy to hear that the MOU was signed. I appreciate Mrs. Washington talking about her the relationship with AID, the American Association of Blacks in Energy, and really having this virtual event. USDA has also been working with AID. I have sat on panels and supported their efforts. And so again, we're really, we're all singing the same song, and I think we're all working collaboratively together, regardless if we're doing it kind of hand in hand or simultaneously. So I certainly appreciate they're a fantastic organization, and we've been very happy to have collaborated with them in their previous conferences. I just want to make a quick, I'm going to maybe kind of shift a little bit in the standpoint of really taking and digesting this innovation in ag and energy. And I think while people understand that there's this energy relation with agriculture, I also want to just make note. We talked a little bit about the Farm Bill yesterday, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in the standpoint of the Farm Bill. So I often tell stakeholders and people that we work with that USDA might be the best kept secret in the energy space. And I'm not taking anything away from my Department of Energy counterparts. I love them dearly. However, our Farm Bill actually has an energy title within the Farm Bill. So we talked a little bit about yesterday. So the Farm Bill is a very large piece of legislation that comes out about every 5 years, and it pretty much drives all of what USDA does, rural development, NRCS, which is the National Resource Conservation Service, food FNS, which is the Food Nutritional Services, so people, the SNAP and the nutritional, the lunch programs, those are administered. They come out of the legislation is actually driven, and those programs are driven based off of what's in the Farm Bill. The last Farm Bill was 2018, and so we're still in some areas working to implement all of the 2018 Farm Bill changes. Some have been quicker than others. We had a 2014 Farm Bill, so again, it's about every 5 years. Just for the sake of the conversation, it's usually about 1,000 pages. So this is a very, very large document in the standpoint of what that looks like, and it drives all of what we do at USDA. So we actually have a section of the Farm Bill that is just devoted to energy programs, which is separate and apart from Department of Energy. And so I'm going to provide just, context a little bit of those programs, just a brief kind of overview. We have our 9003 program, which is our biorefinery, renewable chemical, and bio-based product manufacturing program. Essentially, this program supports new and emerging technologies with new feedstocks. So it's emerging, meaning it's not commercially available, and it supports integrated demonstration units, so things that have gotten past the bench scale. So you have research and development, you have oftentimes what they'll call like a kind of a pilot scale, and then you go into a demonstration scale. And so when you're really talking about this innovation aspect and really looking at pipelining from the benchtop, the R&D world, all the way to full-scale commercialization, it's a very lengthy process. It's a very expensive process, and oftentimes the challenge when you're looking at this landscape is what happens between the integrated demonstration unit and the full-scale commercialization. The scale-up just inherently, it prevents challenges. I don't know, it's just the nature of the engineering and life. It's not just unique to energy, or it's really all scale up. There's just challenges within that space. And so the USDA, we have a program that will support integrated demonstration units of full-scale commercialization for renewable chemicals, bio-based products, as well as advanced biofuels, and any combination thereof. So they can be a standalone or it could be a combination thereof. And that was attained within the Farm Bill in 2018. It used to be you had to make a biofuel, and then, but we've changed those requirements. And so again, this is a really good program. It is a 2-phase application, actually almost 3 phases. A letter of intent that's required 30 days before the first application cycle. We have it in 2 phases, and we have it open up twice a year. So we have an April 1 deadline as well as an October 1 deadline. So you would need to put a letter of intent 30 days prior, and then submit a phase 1 application, and then we will evaluate it based off of technical feasibility as well as financials. We kind of look at everything, market risk, we evaluate all the pieces. You do have to have a feasibility study a business plan, we look at the financials, and so we kind of evaluate everything. And if we, if it meets all of the qualifications, we will invite you to submit a phase 2 application. Again, this is a really good program. The max, it's a guaranteed loan program, a lender-driven program. The max is $250 million. Our 9005 program, which is our advanced biofuel payment plan, really actually supports farmers to making advanced biofuels. And so there was definitely a redo, or there's some changes in the 2018 Farm Bill, and so we're still standing those up. But it's a really good program, and again, it's our 9005 program. It's the Advanced Biofuel Payment Program. We have our 9007 program, and that is our Rural Energy for America program. I spoke extensively about this yesterday, so I won't go all the way down the road through the river. However, it is a grant and guaranteed loan program that supports energy efficiency improvements and renewable energy system installations for agriculture producers located any place and rural small businesses. Anything that's commercially available from a renewable energy perspective, solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, waste energy, waves, so anaerobic digesters, would be eligible. And so that application cycle is open year round. We do have a small subset, what we call our 20,000 and less. The grant program does a max of 25% of total eligible project costs. Our guaranteed loan does a max of 75% of total eligible project costs. The loan is rolling applications. The grant has 2 priority funding deadlines, October 30th and March the 30th. So if anybody's interested, we're happy to talk about that. I will also mention we have a program that the application cycle just closed, our HQIP program, which is our Higher Blend Infrastructure Incentive Program. And so that program is new. And the purpose of it is to increase the sales and use of higher blends of ethanol and biodiesel by expanding the infrastructure for renewable fuels that are derived from U.S. ag products. And so it was fueling stations are eligible to apply, like transportation fueling facilities, as well as fueling distribution facilities. And so that application cycle just is closed in August. They haven't made any final announcements. Approximately $100 million was available through the resources. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll see how it all unfolds. But again, this was a new program that just got kicked off and just started. And so just wanted to kind of like frame out. And these are all programs that are administered through USDA. They are not Department of Energy programs. Although Department of Energy does have fantastic programs, these are not those. And so when really looking at this, the opportunity and the innovation of ag and energy, specifically within the USDA, it's something that we already do. We've been doing it for a very long time. I also want to just make mention, this and all the programs that I just mentioned are administered through rural development. However, because USDA is so massive, we also have other programs that fall outside of rural development and rural business and cooperative services that we that will also support what we were discussing. So I'm just going to mention very briefly, NIFA is the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. It is an extramural funding arm of USDA. They have RFAs that they put out and RFSs, I'm sorry, I think it's either one or both. And so they have an 1890 capacity building grant for both on the teaching as well as the extension side. And so I don't know if people are familiar with the 1890s, but a snapshot of history. 1890s were our land grant institutions that were as a result of the 1890 Morale Act, the second one. The first one was the 1862s, and so there are land grant institutions that fall under the 1862 category, and there are land grants that fall under the 1890s. Often, most of the 1890s are actually HBCUs. And so Tuskegee is an 1890 institution, but there's a lot of them. And so they've got capacity building grants that are specifically for HBCUs. And so I'm sure most HBCU audience members are familiar with this, but for those that are new to this particular landscape, please be on the lookout for NIFA because they do have resources designed just for those 1890 land grant institutions. In addition to a lot of other types. So they also have program and funding dollars, grant dollars for energy, for bioenergy, just lots of different types of things. So, but there's one specifically that just deals with the bioenergy space. NIFA also administers USDA's SBIR, which is a Small Business Innovation Research Grant. There are a lot of different SBIRs out there. USDA has one, Department of Energy has one, NASA has one, SBA has one. So if you're interested in the small business innovation research grant, please be on the lookout. I think they have their own website. However, the one that USDA administers actually comes directly out of NIFA. Again, that's the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. The last program that I'll mention is the National Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. They have a conservation innovation grant, and so I don't have a ton of information on that. I don't work directly with NRCS. However, there's also another resource to consider when evaluating, really looking at the innovation, the investment, the capacity building space. I know that was kind of a lot and it's a lot of information, but just to kind of, I would say the take-home message are there are resources that are available that are directly related to the mission to really advance, to improve, quality of life, to, support agriculture, to make sure that, energy resources are utilized responsibly and environmentally friendly. I think that's all, unless anybody has any questions.
Okay, Venus Welch-White, thank you so much for your Wikipedia knowledge of USDA and your real-time appreciation and experience as an HBCU alum. And Angela, it is my responsibility as your moderator to configure for the both of you a couple of questions and open it up to the audience. So because I have to leave at noon, and I think your panel goes slightly beyond that, if you would allow me to introduce you to my thoughts / question that comes from, as National Director of MBDA literally reminded me, that I'm a third-generation entrepreneur. My grandfather owned 400 acres. He was in real estate. My family, I grew up in the business of nursing homes since the age of 12. And given that background, I understand that it's unique, but it has oriented me to know that to deliver a service, for example, like farmers, we were in the nursing home business and we cared for people who can't care for themselves. Fed them, gave them medication, social services, and things that their family could not render because of their challenges, etc. At one point, I recognized that while we were guided by the state of New Jersey and all of its rules and regulations, we were literally not, we didn't find ourselves bound by being just a provider of services under the sometimes constraints and regulations and, the associated government requirements. We were a customer that delivered a service that the government couldn't do themselves. That ideation in itself, let me pause there because, wow, I look at our farmers. P.J. Haney, a fifth-generation farmer, can go back as far as the history books of his memory, his father's memory, his grandfather's memory, as one of many and like a reflection of most minority farmers today. The challenges that we have financially as farmers, as small businesses, minority businesses, and HBCUs. I would like both of you, if you will, take a moment of time to reflect on your organizations and how we can break down the barriers, how we can address some challenges that may definitely not be the responsibility or the ability for an agency to solve unless, fill in the blanks, unless the HBCUs do this, unless a minority business does this, and this. That's what we call capacity building when we get down to the assessment of recognizing where the root of the problem is. My dad used to say, son, if there's ever a conflict, there must be a root. So would you both take moment of time Think about that long-winded commentary that prefaces the question of what can we do to address these very realistic challenges that minority businesses, farmers face, and HBCUs. Slash, it's hard for a farmer to get off a combine to fill out these proposals and to have an infrastructure to be able to address accessing this most available capital. How? What works? What works? What works? Please tell us. Thank you so much.
If I can start off with a very practical assessment of the question as well as an answer, and it's not anything so novel, but there is something that is very prevalent in our minority business community that we continue to see, and it is the investment back into our businesses. It is the engagement with industry. It is constantly staying the course with the latest and greatest information. And what we found in MBDA as we assess, we look around the country and we find businesses, to your point, Mr. Moore, they have their nose to the grindstone and they don't have time and they haven't made time to assess the other essential parts of the business. It is a very harsh truth and reality to talk about, but that is where it really gets challenging. And there's another adage that we've heard a lot, and it's the mentality that if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. But there is a level of disconnect, which could represent some brokenness from how our businesses were able to sustain in the past versus how they will have to sustain in the future. We are used to having silo operations. Well, the world of the future is much more collaborative than that. And our businesses have to engage. They have to stay engaged with industry, with the congressional movement, the policy around the industries in which they engage. They have to take a role in leadership in these industry associations, if you will, so that they can continue, in my opinion, and this goes across every industry, not just agriculture, but to continue to be engaged where it's relevant. Now, if I were to go to some practical steps, take, for example, we talk about the HBCUs. Well, the HBCUs, as we know, have had a long-term model of tuition and fees as a way of sustainability. Well, that was already a challenge in the past. Now you overlay COVID on top of an infrastructure that was built for the past and not the future. So when you ask what are the practical steps, you know, Mr. Moore, I've said it a couple of times, but I think these are the practical steps where we are today. Taking an assessment of the challenge, putting together the right ecosystems to put together the right solutions. And when you look at us doing that, when a university then takes a look at itself and say, wow, tuition and fees is no longer the model of sustainability. Now we have to see ourselves as a business organization. Now we have to function and fine-tune our resources internally to those that will mirror what's necessary to be able to participate in some of these new technologies and innovative solutions that are present today. So there's an idea that there's the thinking that, and I hate to use this term, but it's frank, you know, being left behind. And if you don't keep up what is happening, you will be left behind. But there's ways for those universities to tap into, and I heard Dr. Welch say it so great, which is some of those developmental grants and those opportunities to help you build the infrastructure out in your program. There's organizations, there's businesses who are looking to be engaged, but they have to be educated on what the opportunities are, and we have to be open to those partnerships. And I'm sorry for taking such a long time, but I see this in a lot of different industries across the minority business community. You can take manufacturing and overlay the very same challenge. You have, and Dr. Thompson, we talked about this, you have the business that's been around and the kid that doesn't want to inherit it. You know, we're lucky when we can say that Haney Farms have a 5-generation story, because 5-generation stories are not necessarily being cultivated that way. And we have to be deliberate in the way that we've been here today, and we have to continue to advocate with federal agencies like MBDA. And this is, I'll say this as I close and give an opportunity to Dr. White. We are human beings here in the federal space. At least as of today, it's not run by robotics and AI. There are real people behind the desk taking in this information and assessing what's needed and trying to come up with real solutions. So we all need you to continue to be a voice in government, be a voice in industry, be a voice in community. Make sure that we know what the challenges are. Make sure we know where you need the help so that we can continue to build out the road and the pavement ahead. We have to be informed just as much as anybody else in the process. We're not all knowing. Oftentimes we're working on a myriad of projects in a myriad of industries. Look at the complexity, if you will, and appreciation you have to have for this summit. Innovation, agriculture, energy, opportunity zones. And we HBCUs, and we spared ourselves on using the word manufacturing, which is another critical component. So cultivation of the ecosystem is critical. What we're doing here today is absolutely essential. This is a mark that's going to be made, and we're going to have to use this mark to continue to advocate to federal agencies and put together a unified voice on where the resources have to be. The federal government has done a lot in this space, and but I can go on and on, so I'm going to force myself to stop so that Dr. White can have an opportunity to talk practically from, you know, her perspective. But that's truly what I see, and I again appreciate being here today.
Thank you for the response. Dr. White.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Ms. Angela Washington. So I'm going to actually break this down into 3 parts because I think it is a very important, and actually I'm going to piggyback off of a lot of what Ms. Washington said. And so I'm going to break this down from for the following things: access, education, and capacity. And I'm going to explain each one. Access. And so when we're really talking about rural communities, and I know I hate to steal anybody's thunder from later on this afternoon, rural communities and the existing infrastructure or lack thereof. And you add a HBCU on top of that or pick something. Oftentimes you've got rural communities that do not have access to broadband. And so we're thinking about, from a technology perspective, where are things actually housed? They're online, right? There's grants.gov. There are applications have to be downloaded in PDF. There are things that need to be accessed online, either from a registration perspective. There's a lot of different things that happen. And if you are in a community that does not have either high-speed access or reliable internet, or the ability to access broadband or to store data, because it's not just about being able to access, it's also being able to not only store it, but also be able to retrieve it in a format that you can actually use it. And so if you think about from a compendium, and that's not anybody's fault, it's just it's the reality of the situation. And so USDA, and I hate to be bringing the USDA bell, but rural development, we actually have broadband programs, millions of dollars, because we recognize, in fact, there are communities that do not have access to it, which impacts businesses, it impacts healthcare, it impacts education, it impacts all those things. And so if you're, on an uneven playing field because you can't even access what everybody else is accessing to be able to get to said application, programs, technical assistance, whatever. So I would say that's one thing that's not helping. And I would say I'm probably putting that more in line of the farmers that are in very, very remote and rural spaces that may not be able to access what those things are. Still, I mean, there are people that still would like a paper application or want to see things in the newspaper. I mean, we definitely have communities that's the best way to actually reach our stakeholders or interested parties. The second is education, and I use this because I don't know if it was education or knowledge. I kind of struggled with this one, but I'm going to call it education. And when I say that, I don't necessarily even mean the traditional like K through 12 education. It's probably, and maybe I'll change this to more of a knowledge base or lack thereof. We really have to understand the differences between grants and loans, and I know that specifically with minority communities, they have a tendency to really want the grant. They're not interested in loans for lots of reasons. And it's not that I don't understand the idea behind, no, I'm not interested in the loan, but I think we need to be able to frame out grant funding and loan funding and how both of them are important and they both serve a role. And a loan is a tool. It's a funding tool. Oftentimes, I think our communities think that if you don't, it's either the lender of last resort. I think oftentimes we do have programs in USDA that you can't have, you would have had to been denied by a commercial lender or traditional lender to be able to access USDA funds. All the programs that I discussed, that's not what that is. And so there's an education or knowledge base that you're assuming that if I'm applying to this federal loan, it's because I can't get any capital any other place, and that might not necessarily be the truth. You might be able to get capital other places, but this is a tool. It's a tool to mitigate risk for lots of different areas. You're able to negotiate your terms with your borrower or with the lender and the borrower. So you might be able to get a longer term or a better interest rate or whatever that looks like. And so really kind of bringing out the knowledge base. In the standpoint of energy, and I think this is important for me to talk about, so I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes here. However, the energy space is huge. And if you don't understand what a kilowatt hour is, there's no way for me to go and tell you, you can save a ton of money or you can increase your operations or improve your bottom line and you just swap out, this for a more efficient equipment or incorporate solar panels into your operation, or maybe you need to do a combined heat and power. There's a lot of different, or install a geothermal system. I mean, we can get into that level of granularity and I'm happy to do that. But if you're not even able to understand how to read your electricity bill, and that the rates change from summer to winter or whatever that looks like, whatever the dynamics and the technical kind of components, it is very, very hard to come in and say, okay, now let's go down this road from an energy space. And what we see in rural communities oftentimes are they have the highest rates and they have the least efficient equipment. And so it's kind of almost a recipe for you can't get out of it. You would need to invest money to get better equipment so you can save on your higher bills. However, because you're spending so much on your bills that you really can't invest you can't invest the resources, or you don't have the resources available to invest in better equipment. And that's common, specifically, I would say, in rural places in the South. Very, very common, and I'm not calling out specific states. However, when we're looking at this knowledge base, and if you don't understand what that looks like, and you don't understand that the payback is 3 years, or and this is really, it's an investment in your business, and you're kind of looking at the upfront cost when, well, I don't have $5,000 or $10,000 or however much dollars it's going to take to swap out this equipment or change my power source or whatever that looks like. There's definitely a knowledge challenge that's there. And so I think we're going to have to really be very intentional about how we discuss energy in context to businesses, ag businesses, manufacturing businesses, any business really, because you're utilizing energy in whatever you're doing. You have lights, you are exerting energy to be able to take care of to run your business. The last thing I will talk about is the capacity. And that's not just, I'm not going to isolate that to just the businesses and the business owners. I'm also going to put the federal government in that. Just like other industries, we're struggling too. There's been a decrease in the amount of federal workers in the past 5-10 years. We're looking at, so when we're talking about, and I can appreciate what you mentioned, Mr. Moore, about, you've got the farmers, they're on a combine, their noses to the ground, they're trying to get things out. There's, how much time is it going to take? Do I have access to the materials that I need to be able to submit said application or meet all the eligibility requirements? And oftentimes it's not that they can't meet it, it's that they can't demonstrate. And they don't have time to stop and try to source through that. The other thing that I will mention is the reporting. So the one thing about working with the federal government is that your stuff has to be airtight. If we're sending you money, we're going to require, to report out what that looks like, how you utilize those funds. And if you have poor record keeping skills, and again, I'm not calling out anybody specifically, but if you are in such a space that your record keeping is not on par, or you're unable to, demonstrate what you've done, that can also be some challenges. So I really think from a capacity perspective, there's some opportunity to really look and say, okay, how do we keep good records? How are we documenting? And I'm going to just kind of talk about the grants that I work with. How are you documenting your energy bills for the past 12 months? What does that look like? What kind of vendors would you be utilizing? Where would you be getting your equipment from? What does that look like in the standpoint of any type of permits that are regulatory requirements, permitting, fees, the timeline of that? What happens when you have to, go and, at least for all of our programs, we have to be compliant with the NEPA, which is the National Environmental Protection Act. So how are you documenting that you're NEPA compliant? Have you gone through all those processes to apply for the grant or whatever type of funding? Have you met all the environmental concerns? Have you done all the reporting on the front end as well as the back end? Have you been able to demonstrate? So I really think when we're looking at this kind of across the space, and I could even mirror to say that some of that could even possibly be in the knowledge component, because if you don't even understand all of what's going to be required, it's going to be very hard for you to bring to apply for these programs and then actually be able to utilize them the way that they were designed. And so again, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I think all of those pieces have to be a part of a successful recipe on minority businesses and rural businesses, and really all businesses being able to access resources.
Okay, I want to thank you very much both for the comprehensive responses that I have taken. Ladies and gentlemen, here's my notes. This conversation will be continued, thankfully, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. And as my dad, rest in peace, used to say to me, if God says the same and the creek don't rise. So I thank you for, planting these seeds of input and thought necessary for us to address these very real challenges. They're challenges that can't be ever accomplished with expectation that they will be solved because of this summit. One day, 2 day. It will require infrastructure changes, appreciation for the realities that you've just expressed, getting to a place of cultivating a comfort level for those HBCUs, farmers, and MBEs to be feeling confident that there's a relationship that can move their businesses and their organizations and their universities to a higher level of success and progress and help them overcome and achieve. As well, they have to be sensitive and do their own work that's required to meet the expectations of government. Therein lies seems to be some of the inequities and imbalances that we hope innovation, commitment to engaging diversity, and breaking down barriers. And we could not have any better two individuals who represent two hugely important organizations that can help us address that. So we thank you for not only being a part. There are some questions and answers. I'm going to have to move to a conference call to report out on the summit. And so Dr. Thompson, please take over with the questions that you have remaining with the time that we have remaining. I'm so humbled by Angela and Venus's your participation in this first ever Innovation in Agriculture and Energy Opportunity Zone Summit 2020 online. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Keith, and all the best on your call. Yeah, Dr. White, I noticed you mentioned that some of the challenges that you yourself, and I would say you representing the USDA has realized that the audiences to which these opportunities, grants, loan, are targeted to are lacking in certain skills. For example, not being able to understand the difference between kilowatts and not being able to read the electric bill, right? But that being said, and that being an awareness in constructing some of these opportunities, is the USDA looking into like educating these rural people on all these facets of an electrical bill on and as well as energy? Okay, that's my question right here.
So yeah, so we have discussions at USDA regarding this specifically, and I would say one of the things that we're cognizant and aware that there are different education levels. So oftentimes we've got potential applicants that English may not be their first language. And so recognizing that there are some challenges even from the communication perspective. And so, yes, we are aware that these things exist. We are working to address some of these barriers, but I will say, and I mentioned in the capacity aspect of it, we don't necessarily have enough people, in PICA agency. It's not just USDA or Farm Service Agency or Rural Development or NRCS to comprehensively address all of these concerns. And so that really comes into, can we partner with community organizations that have a relationship with these communities that they already trust? And while I didn't want to mention, there are some challenges with the federal government in certain communities. They don't necessarily trust the federal government. Everybody's not going to take too kindly to we're with the government and we're here to help. That's not going to be well received across every space. So it becomes, I would say, necessary and important to make sure that we're partnering with organizations, HBCUs, that the communities trust. So there's not this trust challenge in the middle of that and where you're trying to provide information. So yes, we're aware and we're working to address these challenges. But again, it can't be a standalone of the federal government only, just because there's a lack of capacity in that particular space.
Okay, I got it. Right. Yeah. One of Keith's questions, and I think Angela addressed this to some extent, is that the audience of which some of these opportunities are geared towards are sometimes extremely busy, and what they have realized is that the government requirements have been becoming more and more complicated. Lots of paperwork, right? And sometimes that can hinder their productivity, right? Now, is there any way that the government is looking to sort of reduce some of these requirements or making some of these paperwork less burdensome in an effort to make some of these programs more successful? That's my question.
I would say I don't know of any specific program efforts, but I can tell you that is something that's always ongoing in most federal agencies. We have program evaluation standards. We have a number of ways that we're evaluated as an agency by the Office of Management and Budget. And oftentimes when a process becomes overly cumbersome, an agency is prompted to change it. Now, I certainly don't want to be responsible for inciting any type of lobbying, but I think there's a line of education that I'm always talking about, how communities can continue to inform government where those barriers exist, and even if it's something as simplistic in the application process, sometimes simply making an agency aware of the cumbersome process is enough to ignite what could become the initial change in how even an application is processed or received, or how a regulation is implied. As you know, the federal government is run most by the FAR, with the defense being the DFAR, but oftentimes there are deviations and rule changes as necessary. So I would say it's important for our organizations, our business communities, to continue to raise that level of awareness when there are places for change. But I don't know of any specific right now that are going across the agriculture sector. There are a number going across the environmental sector that may overlay with agriculture, I'll refer to Dr. White and see maybe if she has some additional insight. But I would say keep in mind the ability to influence those things as critical as a recommendation as any.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. White?
Thanks so much, Angela. Yes, so I appreciate, she actually laid out everything beautifully. Yes, we are required as a federal government to, we are evaluated. We have our own internal processes that we look at applications, look at what we call the burden to the public, the burden to the agency itself, because when things are cumbersome, they're not just cumbersome to the applicant, they're cumbersome to the agency that's administering the program. So the REAP program actually underwent some changes in the 2014 Farm Bill where we streamlined our application and required less documentation based off of the amount of the total project cost, i.e. the grant request amount. And so we have, it's actually 3-tiered. So applications that projects are, so this is the Rural Energy for America program, I mentioned it earlier. It's a grant part of it as well as a guaranteed loan portion. And so for our grants, we have a tiny subset, what we call of 20,000 or less, meaning that the total project cost is actually 80,000 or less. And it requires, for example, an energy audit, not an energy assessment. An energy assessment, not energy audit, I apologize, I have the reverse. An energy assessment is a lot cheaper and easier to obtain, doesn't have to be a qualified, the credentials for who does it is not as stringent. And so that's one example of how we did change those requirements because we got feedback that the application was really hard. So the higher the amount of the grant, the more documentation and the more comprehensive the application is. And so the smaller one, the 20,000 and less, is pretty straightforward. You have to provide, the payback information, your 12 months of your utility bills. You have to demonstrate that whatever improvement that you're proposing to do is going to be a significant reduction either in efficiency or we're looking at the amount of energy that's going to be generated from a renewable perspective. And so that's just one example. And again, that's taken place. That came as a part of the 2014 Farm Bill. Those changes were implemented at the end of 2015, and we actually haven't had any. I don't recall, but don't quote me, that we haven't had a lot of complaints. I would say that the streamline of application was welcome. The other thing that we've undergone within rural development, and this actually is effective as of October 1, is what we call our 1RD guaranteed, our 1RD rule. So essentially we have a rule that governs 4 of our guaranteed loan programs. It governs our business and industry guaranteed loan program, our Renewable Energy for America guaranteed loan program, the REAP, our community facilities guaranteed loan, as well as the waste and environmental programs, WEP, that falls under our rural utility service. And so you have basically one rule that's governing these 4 guaranteed loan programs to make it easier on the lender and on the borrower from the standpoint of what's required. And so again, that was because we got feedback that, hey, from a lender perspective, it's really hard. I'm going to combine a REAP and a business and industry loan, but it's 2 different applications or there are different requirements or whatever some of the feedback was. It makes it really hard to combine these guaranteed loans. And so that was a response from the agency, and in fact is implemented right now. The other thing that I will say, just to mention, and this is really more just for more situational awareness in very broad context, is check the Federal Register. The Federal Register, federalregister.gov, is posted. It's basically like the federal government's newspaper. And right. So anything that's out that needs, that's open for public comment, any type of announcements of either stakeholder events, sometimes just information, point of reference, depending on what that looks like. Environmental, if there's environmental things that are posted, have to be like out for a 30-day for comment period. So there's a lot of information that you can be informed and stay abreast of what's happening. And so comments to, proposed rules, changes, feedback, it's there. So I would encourage for, participants, stakeholders, general public to go to the Federal Register. Again, it's, it comes out every single day. It's posted every single day. And again, it's the lifeline to the federal government in the standpoint of what's happening. And again, if there's public comments for whatever's happening, proposals, different things, often they're even advisory. If there's a federal advisory commission or committee that's, seeking nominations for members, it's posted in the Federal Register. So it's a fantastic resource, and I would encourage people to look out for that. And also, if you have comments and concerns, to make those known during the appropriate and applicable timelines and an opportunity.
Oh yes. Okay. Good. So we are about on time. It's about 12:15 right now. I want to thank Dr. Welch White and Angela Washington for their input. I think it was great. There's a lot of important information that was disseminated here today. I hope everyone has taken notes, as Keith has mentioned. And this has been, a very great, successful session. I want to thank you both again. And if there's no other input, this would conclude the session.